All right, Monica Moorehead.
Yes.
Thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Well,
Hello.
yes, I'm here.
Oh yeah, sorry. So I guess that I would like to start by just asking if you could just kind of describe who you are, how you became involved in politics, and what your mission, what your party's mission is, and basically what you're doing in 2016.
Okay. Well, I have been an activist for over 40 years. I'm 64 years old. I was born under segregation in Alabama in 1952. Um, my parents were part of the Montgomery bus boycott back
Okay.
in 1955. They both were professors at an historical black college, Alabama State University. So when the boycott began, they were able to drive, other black people around. They were one of the few black people in Montgomery, Alabama, that had cars. So my parents are part of that movement, and growing up under segregation really shaped my political outlook at a very young age. When I was a teenager in Hampton, Virginia, I was a member of the band there, and just to keep in mind that it was one of the first desegregated schools in Hampton and throughout the South back in 1967, 68. And the fight song for our, teens was Dixie, which was a pro-Confederate song, anthem. And when I refused to play the song, I was kicked out of the band. So that helped to raise my consciousness, along with being one of the few black students in an all-white school, which was very, very difficult at that time. I was very much influenced by the Black Panther Party, um, and helped to get out the paper as a teenager on the weekends. I was very much influenced by the prison uprisings at that time, like around the Attica Rebellion back in 1971, the Soledad prison rebellion that included George Jackson, who was martyred by the prison administration. He was a leader of the Black Panther Party, and all of this activism that I had that I um, was involved in from high school to college when I went to Hampton Institute, which is now Hampton University, led me to Workers' World Party because at that time there was so many prison uprisings and rebellions going on that I sort of associated myself with supporting prisoners, and I started my own group at Hampton. And Workers' World Party at that time had a mass organization called the Prisoner Solidarity Committee, and they had a chapter, in Richmond, Virginia, which I started communicating with and working with. And so when I met the party back in 1973, I began to work with the party around various local and national issues. But it wasn't until 1975 that I actually joined the party. And the reason I joined the party in 1975 was that prior to that, in December of 1974, there was a major struggle against racism that was going on in Boston, Massachusetts, whereby Klan-like forces were attacking the right of black children to to go to desegregated schools. So much so that when black children were being transported to predominantly white schools, they were being bombarded with bottles and rocks and so forth. And so this became a major national crisis. Um, and so our party, I was in Norfolk, Virginia at the time, working with that chapter of our party in Norfolk, that we organized buses to go to Boston in December of 1974. It was called the March Against Racism. And it was a broad coalition that Workers' World Party helped to organize around the banner, around a united front of fighting racism. So you had all these different groups and activists from all different political experiences and ideologies coming together for a common cause to stop these racist attacks on black children and the black community, defending the right of the black community to send their children to whatever school they wanted to, including predominantly white schools. And so we organized 2 buses to go to Boston. Didn't seem like a lot back at that time, but it was a major mobilization. And once we got to Boston, we joined 25,000 other people from around the country who came to show solidarity against racism. And it was at that time that I realized the Workers' World Party was really for me from the point of view of helping me to realize the real roots of racism. Because growing up in the South, I just thought that all white people were racist because that was my experience growing up in Alabama and other parts of the South. And when I realized that racism is rooted in an economic system of capitalism that seeks to divide and conquer, all working and for people, I realized, oh my goodness, this is a very important situation or experience, a very important moment in helping me to develop a world outlook against capitalism, against imperialism. So that's when I joined this party in 1975. I was able to travel around the world to show solidarity with many other oppressed people who are fighting against imperialism, also to show solidarity with those countries like Cuba, like North Korea, who had already had revolutions of their own, socialist revolutions of their own, to show that there were people inside the United States who defended those revolutions against any kind of imperialist aggression. So I was able to travel to Iraq before the Iraq War, again to Cuba, DPRK, to Puerto Rico, and the Philippines, the Dominican Republic, and other countries. South Africa, I was able to attend the first conference of the African National Congress once it was unbanned, once apartheid was being dismantled. So anyway, these are some of the experiences that I've had in the party. At home, I was very much a part and still a part of the movement to free political prisoners like Mumia Abu-Jamal, Leonard Peltier, and many other political prisoners whose only so-called crime is to, fight for the liberation of their people against imperialism, and many other anti-racist struggles. I first ran for president in 1996, then in 2000, and now in 2016. The reason why we have run in the election since 1980 is to really expose these elections for the fraud that they are. That these elections every 4 years are made to dupe people into believing that fundamental change comes through these elections. That just by voting for a Democrat or Republican would just make things better, make conditions better for the majority of people in this country, when really nothing really changes. There's still, the billionaires and the millionaires who control everything in society, control all the wealth in society, including stealing the labor of the workers who create all the wealth in society, that create everything in society to make it run for the better of all people. But they control all of this. They privatize everything to make profit, to fill their coffers. Whether they're the bankers or the corporate giants like Walmart or General Motors, other corporations on Wall Street. So anyway, this is why Workers' War Party runs in the election. We have no faith in this system. It cannot be reformed. We feel that only socialism can bring about real equality and lay the basis for bringing about equality and to free up workers to produce for human need and not for corporate greed. So that's sort of in a nutshell, what I'm all about and what our party has been about since 1959, way before we even started participating in these elections.
Wow. There's a lot there. That's really your experiences in the 60s and the 70s are like, that's a whole other interview right there. So jumping off of what you just said about your feelings about the elections, which you are participating in, but that you also understand are maybe fraudulent isn't the right word, but they're
fraudulent's pretty good.
Fraudulent's pretty good. Okay. So just jumping off of that, I just wanted to I've asked Ms. Lariva and Dr. Stein and Mr. Saltizik the same thing. So I just wanted to ask you, and it's a little bit different actually right now at this point in the quote unquote primary season. But do you feel, well, what do you think of the Bernie Sanders movement, and what do you think that, irrespective of the fact that some people might call him like a sheepdog, or a less than credible messenger, but do you feel that his candidacy and campaign have opened any doors for Workers' World, and if so, why, and if not, why not?
Okay. Well, what we didn't expect in the 2016 elections is to have a candidate like Bernie Sanders, who for many, many decades has viewed himself as a democratic socialist. Even when he was a senator in Vermont. So once he announced his candidacy for the Democratic Party, it really started to shake up the inner circles of the Democratic Party, because I think for many of those in the Democratic National leadership, they were hoping that Hillary Clinton, who we view as a warmongerer, who we view as very much a pro-Wall Street establishment candidate, I think a lot of them were hoping that she would have a smooth sailing through these primaries, and that really hasn't been the case. Although she is now being viewed, and she, of course, she has enough of the delegates to become the nominee. But for Bernie Sanders, we overwhelming event from this point of view. Not so much of, because looking at him as an individual, but because of the movement that has been, what's the word, vitalized and excited by having a candidate like, having a candidate like Sanders. So he has a real genuine movement that is supporting him. And this movement includes a lot of young people, many, of course the majority of them are white, but also people of color, who have been excited by his campaign. It has opened up some doors in terms of the whole issue of socialism, which has been so demonized for many, many decades, coming out of the Cold War, coming out of the McCarthyite era of the 50s, when just saying you were socialist or communist, just doomed your career. Many were forced into exile, so that has changed. There's a now new political sea change that has happened because people are now becoming more and more attracted to socialism in general, because so many people are becoming anti-capitalist. They see that capitalism offers no future, especially for young people. And we saw this with the Occupy Wall Street movement, which was definitely anti-capitalist back in 2011. So a lot of those forces who came out of the Occupy movement are now part of the Sanders movement, but also because, Sanders, although he has not come out strongly in terms of fighting racism, he has not made fighting racism a major part of his platform, which we feel is a big, big weakness on his part. That he did not come out firmly in support of the Black Lives Matter movement until he was pushed to do so when when some of his rallies were disrupted by black activists who have been fighting against police brutality, especially since the killing of Trayvon Martin in 2012. And so it sort of forced him to come out more against fighting racism. But it's very unfortunate that he didn't, take it upon himself to do it, without this type of pressure from below. But on the other hand, he has really excited a lot of activists. Whenever you see a lot of the rallies or people opposing the Trump rallies, in fact, these racist, neo-fascist type rallies, a lot of people who are disrupting Trump are carrying Bernie Sanders signs, along with showing solidarity with people of color, especially those who have been attacked so viciously by Trump, especially immigrants, mainly from Latin America, Muslims, etc. You have anti-racist whites who are standing right there in solidarity with people of color, and many of them are carrying Sanders signs. So this is very, very encouraging for moving forward beyond the elections. Because as I said before, we feel that one of our biggest messages is to say that, nothing's going to change, after these elections. In fact, with the economic crisis, which is a global crisis of austerity, that's also hitting right here inside the United States. It's just going to get worse. So people need to prepare. People need to prepare to organize and fight back beyond the elections. Because, and I'll end with this about Bernie Sanders. His foreign policy is not really that different from Hillary Clinton. It really isn't. in terms of his support for Zionist Israel. I mean, he said some positive things about Palestinians, but he is for a two-state solution in the Middle East. We're not for that. We're for, the right of Palestinians to come back to their homeland, and that homeland not to be occupied by Israel, which was set up by the U.S. and Britain in the first place to be a garrison state against the peoples of the Middle East. He hasn't come out against that.
No, totally. And actually, I wanted to get to foreign policy a little bit later.
Okay. Okay.
But what I do want to do is I want to go back. This has all been really interesting, and I wanted to go back to you talked about Trump and about Clinton during that. So I just wanted to kind of shift this last part of domestic politics to that. And the way I want to set this up is that so you were saying in 1975 that was when you became motivated to join Workers' World, and I'm pretty sure that it's in 1975 that Donald Trump is first mentioned in the pages of the New York Times, and the reason that he's mentioned is because he's being sued by black tenants who he is basically like not allowing inside of his buildings. He's not allowing them to rent. It's a discrimination lawsuit. And I just thought that was kind of an interesting juxtaposition of the same year or era and two different moments. And I just wanted to, and then you were saying that you felt that that Clinton is, well, I mean, you can go on and use whatever adjectives you want. They're all fine here, but I just wanted to. You also said that you felt that nothing would change after the election in November. So if you could just kind of explain why Clinton and Trump, why they're so similar, why it doesn't really matter which one of them gets into office, and just I guess what the Workers' World Party perspective is on the two candidates and on the 2016 election, and then we'll move on to foreign policy.
Okay, great. But let me just, before I do that, let me just say this about Sanders and the domestic policy, because he is trying to, a lot of people view him, and he views himself as a newer version of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He is for reforming capitalism. So this is where we differ with him in terms of, the socialist idea. And, he talks about the political revolution and so forth. And it's, and it's all, progressive and so forth. But we feel that it's, utopia, it's pie in the sky, that you really can't reform capitalism, that you can't appeal to Wall Street to give up its profits in order to provide free education and health care and so forth. You can't really regulate Wall Street. Maybe just, get a few bills passed here and there, but unless you mobilize people to fight, for these demands, it's not going to happen. It's always going to be, this resistance by, what we call the ruling class. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Sure.
Now, in terms of why we don't feel there's a difference between Clinton and Trump, is because they're part of the same class. The only difference is that Trump, he has no filter in terms of what he would say. No filter whatsoever. How he views Mexicans, calls them, quote unquote, rapists and criminals and so forth. It is so vile. It's so vile. In other words, he says what he thinks. And frankly, Clinton has the same view. Hillary Clinton has the same view. And what she's trying to do, when you look at the fact that she was, when she was the Secretary of State under Obama, look at what happened in terms of what happened to Libya. A democratically elected regime in Libya for many, many years was violently overthrown while Clinton was Secretary of State. In terms of Honduras, another democratically elected administration was violently overturned while she was, Secretary of State. So, and in terms of, her husband and what his policies and so forth, in terms of getting rid of welfare and so forth, she's all connected to that. So that's why we say there's no difference fundamentally between Clinton and Trump, because there's no difference fundamentally between the Democrats and Republicans. They're both the parties for the rich and for the military. And what Clinton is trying to do, she is trying to scare people because of Trump and his racism and neo-fascist type misogyny views. She's hoping that people be scared, so scared, whether they are Republicans or Democrats, will vote for her because of what Trump what he represents. Even those within the Republican Party, now there's a movement to try to overturn his nomination, as the nominee for the president of the United States. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens at both the Republican National Convention, in terms of what's going to happen there, if this, with this internal strife that's happening within the Republican Party, and also what the Bernie Sanders forces are going to do at the Democratic National Convention in Philadelphia, because will he fold? Will he come out in support of Clinton, or will his supporters try to force him, to do something else? And I think he may even try his hand at write-in campaigns, as we're doing as well. So,
well, we'll see. I would say that it has been my belief for the last year that Sanders absolutely will fold. I don't think there's any question about that. I don't have any faith in him having any kind of integrity as far as that goes. But and I think one of the reasons that I have been doing a lot of these interviews with third party left candidates is because one thing, and if you want to comment on this, I'd love that, is that what I'm afraid is going to happen is that when Sanders endorses Clinton, and if it's even as bad as him officially coming out as a Democrat and during the DNC, and I'm really afraid that his supporters are going to be just so apathetic after that, and they're just going to be like, you know what, screw this, there's no, and it's, I want to make clear, that's different than what you're saying, that the elections are fraudulent, but you're still taking part in them because you're trying to expose that. What I'm afraid is that they think, hey, the elections are fraudulent, and now I don't want to be politically active at all anymore because nothing matters and there's no possible way to change it. So what I'm hoping that his supporters just go nuts when that happens and really disrupt the DNC.
Well, yeah, we share the same concern you do. Absolutely. And that's another reason why we're running in the elections. Yes, we have a 10-point program. Yes, we have a 15-point program that indicates, everything that we're fighting for, and why capitalism and imperialism cannot provide these human needs, both at home and abroad. But the other message we have is that it's important for people to stay active in the struggle, to become independent. There's nothing more important than being independent, of course, from the Republicans, but especially from the Democrats, because for so long, the Democratic Party has portrayed itself as, the champions for people people of color, for workers, and so forth. And there's a historical reason for that, which would take another discussion.
Right, right.
But we want to really just smash that myth, because no, people have to become independent, have to remain active or become active if they weren't active before, but because they were attracted to Sanders' program, to his honesty, which we really feel that he's a pretty honest guy, and it's very interesting that for someone who is 76, 77 years old, so many young people are attracted to somebody like him. And I think it's because of his message, that he does want to see real change. But how you go about getting that change is where we differ with him, because of the reformism versus, we're for revolutionary socialism, and that's our message. And we want to help strengthen the movement. And it will be very interesting to see what comes out of the DNC. We're very. It's hard to sort of see what we don't have a crystal ball in terms of what may happen, but we're watching very closely. We're going to be in the streets in Philadelphia during the Democratic National Convention, but it's going to be very interesting to see what happens after the convention. And leading up to the November elections, but we're so interested in what happens after the elections. Because like I said, the economic crisis is just going to fuel more and more poverty and inequality, more repression, and so forth, because in more white supremacy. And so we really want to reach out to those Bernie Sanders supporters to say, listen, you cannot become apathetic. You really can't. This goes way beyond an individual like Bernie Sanders. We're talking about a whole system of, repression and racism and militarism and so forth. So we're hoping to help unite the movement as it exists now, and also these new forces that will be confused, they'll be apathetic, and they'll be demoralized. And we want to fight that.
Excellent. So let's move to foreign policy, if that's cool.
Sure.
So we kind of touched on this before. We're talking about imperialism in the Middle East, specifically Israel, which is usually like a pretty I don't know how exactly I put it. Maybe like a flashpoint of difference between political parties on the left, even those which are all anti-Zionist can have different degrees and different ideas about it. But I was thinking, well, we can talk about that if you want. I also wanted to talk about what's going on in Syria, and I wanted to get your perspective on Latin America and just generally, I think like the last 16 years of if for whatever level that people may be paying attention to what the U.S. has been doing overseas for like the last 16 years, like okay, I guess I'm just trying to put this in vague terms. I'm not trying to like make this a specific question, but there was a Bush doctrine, there is an Obama doctrine. They are slightly different in degree and in particulars, but the U.S. imperial project continues unabated. So, yeah, I guess that would just be a jumping out point, and just kind of whichever direction you want to take that in, whatever you want to say about that, and just basically your platform and Workers' World and all that stuff.
Well, let me just start with our platform, and then I'll take it from there.
Perfect.
Let's see. I have it right in front of me. Okay, just let me read this. And is point number 8 in our platform.
Mm-hmm.
Where we say, defeat imperialism, shut down the Pentagon, U.S. hands off of Latin America, the Caribbean, Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, build international solidarity. U.S. imperialism has 1,000 military bases and the largest military budget in history, all to impose capitalist domination globally. We oppose all U.S. wars, invasions, occupations, and drone attacks, regardless of the media lies and justification. We oppose sanctions, which is another, just
it's a form of war.
Arm of war. We oppose economic destabilization and all U.S. so-called free trade agreements, such as the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which breaks unions, wrecks the environment, and violates national sovereignty. We demand independence, reparations for countries like Haiti, and canceling the debt from Puerto Rico to Africa to Greece. We oppose NATO, the war in Syria, and the encirclement of Russia and China, threats against People's Korea, and the revolutionary movement in Venezuela. We demand justice for the 43 students, the Ayatollah 43, and an end to the drug war in Mexico and everywhere. We support the Palestinian people's full national liberation, sovereignty, and right to return. We call for an end to all U.S. aid to Israel and all reactionary governments worldwide. So that's our platform, our anti-imperialist platform in a sort of in a very succinct way. But I think the main thing is that we as a party, we've always supported the right of nations, especially the underdeveloped nations, their right to sovereignty and to build their economy independent and free from imperialism. That's why there's so much, underdevelopment in the world, because these countries, whether you're talking about, in Latin America, Venezuela for so many years, Colombia, Brazil, we talk about in Asia, whether that's Thailand or Malaysia, and of course almost the whole African continent, which is still the most underdeveloped continent in the world, because of slavery and the theft of so many, rich minerals and so forth. Imperialism as a economic system has done everything it can to stop this development, whether it's through war or the IMF, the World Bank, or destabilizations, campaign, colonialism, neo-colonialism. All of these have been, efforts to stop this development so that imperialism can control all of these economies. And of course, with the Pentagon, with all the bases, they are the protectors of the profits for the ruling class, the small, tiny clique of, greedy bosses and bankers. All they care about is making profits at the highest rate possible. And so whenever you're raising a particular country like Syria or Palestine or Venezuela, they may have different degrees of development, because Venezuela has all this oil. They're so rich in oil, but they're still fighting the oligarchy, which the U.S. supports. They're still fighting around this wealth. The current government in Venezuela, led by a bus driver, Nicolas Maduro, he's trying to carry on socialist development in Venezuela, even though they haven't had a socialist revolution, which Hugo Chavez was hoping to see in his lifetime. So this is the issue. This is a big struggle over, over resources, over workers having the right to to free up their labor, to stop the exploitation of their labor. This is the fundamental question that's going on in the world today with Syria. Syria with the ongoing crisis there with the so-called rebels who are supported by NATO, who are sort of supported by the U.S. They're trying, these so-called rebels are seeking to destroy the whole country, and then they're going to blame it on, President Assad. And what we say to that is that only the people of Syria should have a say in terms of whether they want to have President Assad as their president or not, without the interference of imperialism, whether that's directly the U.S. military or from their proxies, which are these rebels. And that's the fundamental issue, that we see in the world. It doesn't mean that when we say defend the right of sovereignty, it doesn't mean that we support all of the policies of a certain government or administration. It certainly does not. In fact, we will definitely disagree, especially when it comes to how a certain government treats its workers or farmers or whatever. But that's not the issue. The bigger issue is getting imperialism off the backs of the people of Syria so they can make that decision and not be forced to make that decision, which is what U.S. imperialism is seeking to do, not only there, but around the world. Look at Zimbabwe in Africa. I mean, here's a country that was torn apart by apartheid, by a white racist regime led by Ian Smith.
Mm-hmm.
And you had these war veterans, these indigenous war veterans in Zimbabwe fighting for their land from these white farmers. And you have a government led by Robert Mugabe, maybe with all of its contradictions, but clearly on the side of these farmers, because he was part of the national liberation movement in Zimbabwe, especially before it even became Zimbabwe, when it was still Rhodesia. And so the U.S., and because he supported the right of these farmers to take back their land. This was their land, the land of their ancestors. And why should these white farmers, why should they control it? They're part of the colonial, settler regime. They have no right to that land. They stole that land, millions of acres, and so forth. So when Mugabe, with his government, said, "Listen, we're passing these laws, giving the land back to their rightful owners," oh my goodness! I mean, the demonization that came from the U.S. and Great Britain was just relentless, And so, and we say no. This is the people of Zimbabwe should have a right to their self-determination, especially in terms of the land. It's their land by birthright. So this is what I mean when I say the right to self-determination for oppressed countries, for underdeveloped countries, who now all they want is to provide food, provide all the human needs for their population, with free from imperialist domination. But imperialism is a system that needs profit. They need profit. They need those profits to expand or die in terms of expanding their markets, and which means destroying local economy to do that. So anyway, that's sort of how we view the foreign policy situation. I mean, that's our view.
Yeah, no. And so jumping off of that, um, another thing that I've been doing recently is I've been asking third-party candidates what their first 100 days in office would look like, um,
Mm-hmm.
and it's it it's a mental exercise, obviously, but I think that it's useful, and I think that it shows that your candidacy should be taken seriously, and that you should be being asked these same questions that they're asking, you know, the Democrats and the Republicans, and increasing the Libertarians, at least on MSNBC. Um, so, um, well, why don't we just start by you describing what the first 100 days of a Moorhead presidency would look like, and then I'll ask you some specific questions about how you would potentially take care of some of the problems and roadblocks that you might face.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Okay.
Cool. Great. So,
First of all, if I was president, um, I would issue a number of emergency decrees because there's so much suffering going on here. There's so much poverty. There's so much repression, and of course, this will all be a process because this is a huge country of over 300 million people, different nationalities, different degrees of need and so forth. But I think the main thing is to issue some national decrees that would, um, first of all, deal with, well, I don't know what it'd be first, but dealing with hunger and malnutrition. There's a lot of people, in the barrios and urban areas who are dealing with hunger and malnutrition. So opening up, we had a campaign, I have to say this, we had a campaign in the 1980s where we demanded that the Department of Agriculture open up its, provide their surplus food that were just stored away, just tons of food, cheese and so forth. And so we demanded that the government, because of the hunger crisis in the United States, would just open up these doors, just to mass distribute this food. And look at all the supermarkets. The supermarkets have all this food that's just sitting there. A lot of it's rotting. But unless you have money to pay for, vegetables and, nutritious food, people just are forced to, go to McDonald's, go to these fast food places where the food is cheaper, but it's so unhealthy. It's so unhealthy. So we would sort of open up these provide the surplus food that the government has hidden away, and also the supermarkets too. We would open up the supermarkets so people can eat. Those who have been hungry and malnourished. That's one decree. And also reopening the hospitals. So many hospitals have been closed down in clinics. And why? Because they're not making a profit. It's not because people don't need, health care. But a lot of these hospitals, at least in New York City, even though I live in Jersey City, I live very close to New York City. And these hospitals that have provided, treatment for people with AIDS and HIV and, all kinds of different services, regardless of people's ability to pay, they're being shut down and turned into condominiums. In Jersey City, where I live, there used to be a hospital called the Jersey City Medical Center. It was the largest public hospital in the country. It was built during the WPA when Roosevelt was president. It was a 6,000-bed hospital. And it's now turned into a condominium.
it's not
A
surprising.
condominium. And hardly anybody lives there. But you have to have $3,000 to $4,000 a month to live there. I mean, that is criminal. So this is happening all over the country. So there will be a decree to reopen the hospitals and clinics because you have doctors and nurses who want to work. They want to provide this health care. They see it as a priority. Also for the homeless. I mean, there's over 1 million, 2 million homeless people in this country. A lot of them, at least 60,000, I believe, are, live in New York City alone. Why not open up the Trump Towers, to provide housing, emergency housing for homeless people? And there's so many abandoned buildings and so forth that could be reopened temporarily for the homeless. I mean, it's criminal that people are forced to live on the street. It's criminal. So that's another emergency. And then also there's education, providing free education for people. The schools are being shut down too, especially in the urban areas, rural areas. So reopening the schools because teachers have been laid off. Get those teachers back working in these schools. Also, we would start the process of disarming the police. That's a big controversy. But we have the police right now in this country are occupying armies, especially for black and brown people, and also indigenous people too. So we would start the process of not only disarming the police, but providing community control of the police. Because a lot of communities have already started that process. They're monitoring what the police do in their communities. They have these cop watchers and so forth. And we would definitely try to institutionalize what's already happening in certain communities. Because the police they are carrying out a genocidal racist war, especially against black and brown youth. They are the target. We have to stop the police from killing our people and occupying our communities. Anyway, those are some of the emergency decrees
Yeah, I wanted to.
that I would carry out.
Yeah, I wanted to. Well, I guess I have a couple of questions, but first I just wanted to ask you, going off of that of the police, have you heard of this the concept of mutual drawdown?
No.
Okay, so it's been floated around as an idea. I don't think it's really caught people's attention too much, but the idea is basically that instead of a gun control scheme for the population, is that you get the state and the population to, well, at least the police part of the state, to like slowly like demilitarize from assault weapons and yeah, I mean that's basically the idea that you get that the people will start to disarm for assault weapons and for machine guns, etc. But the caveat is that the police have to like start like getting rid of their tanks and their bazookas and their extreme weapons. It's not really a proposal that's met with much attention, but I was just wondering if you had heard of it.
No, I haven't, and I'm glad you raised that because we see no equal sign between the police disarming and people disarming. Because the police, they act as part of what we call the repressive state apparatus. And that apparatus reflects the fact that we live in a society of classes, that you have one class that oppresses another class, and the class that oppresses us is a tiny minority, and so they need the police, they need the FBI, they need the CIA, they need ICE, which is the Immigration Custom Enforcement, to control the masses, because the masses are dealing with inequality. And so when the people have arms, like when the Black Panther Party came out in 1967 to bear arms, it was those arms are being bared because of they were trying to show that people had the right to self-defense against the police, and because the police are there as an occupying army. So for us, there's no equal sign between the police disarming and people disarming. And if people had jobs, if people had all their human needs, you would see a lot of the violence that's happening, in our community. You would see that cease because there would be no basis for it. There would be no basis for people killing each other because their conditions would not warrant it if we provide the type of healthy environment that people deserve. Even what's going on in the prisons. I mean, those prisons are filled with unemployed people who are dealing with drug addiction, people who are dealing with mental illness, people who are dealing, with antisocial behavior because they're forced to expropriate or take whatever they need because they don't have a job.
Right.
They don't have the income. So once we start getting rid, and it's all a process, it doesn't happen overnight. Once we lay the basis for eradicating these conditions for the masses, then you're going to see people cooperating with each other, treating each other with dignity, because it would lay the basis for equality and making sure everybody, can become full, productive human beings. So, but right now, can't happen. You're going to see more and more massacres, as we saw in Orlando, and what we saw at Sandy Hook, because people are just alienated from society. The alienation is just deepening. It's not. We're going to see more and more of that.
That is excellent. I think. Is it okay if we leave it there?
Yes.
That was wow. I just think that's such a perfect place to end it. And also it helps that I completely agree with you about that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for doing this. As I told your press guy there, I'm sorry I forget his name. Tony, yeah. I'll generate at least 3 articles out of this, and they'll go up over the next couple weeks.
Oh, thank you.
And I don't know if this'll happen, if I'll ever have the time for it, but I would really love to really talk with you in super detail about everything that you were saying about the 50s and to the 70s, basically how you grew up, how you became politically active. The reason that I say about having time for it, because I feel like the questions that I would ask you would be like hours and hours and hours. But I mean, I'd be totally down to do that. I have my master's in U.S. history, and a lot of the work that I've done has been around the integration and the anti-integration backlash and the 70s, and the rise of modern conservatism, and the defeat of the left in 68 and 72, and basically everything. My point is, everything that you were saying, it just dovetails right into that. And so maybe some later date, I would love the opportunity, if you'd be okay with that, to sit down and talk more.
That would be great. Yeah, this is really great. This is, you've got me really, the juice is really flowing here in terms of,
Yeah.
What's really important, and I just want to say too that, one thing I did want to say is that in terms of the 100 the first 100 days would look like.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is very important. At least say this: that none of this could be carried out unless the masses are mobilized. Whether I'm in the White House or not, none of this could be carried out because there will be so many barriers set up to stop this from happening. And that you have to bring out the workers, you have to bring out women, you have to bring out the LGBTQ community. You have to ask people to come to Washington D.C. Because I cannot win these emergency decrees or laws or whatever, like a people's agenda, without the people.
Yeah.
Without the people, they have to come to D.C. and stay until and that's what's really needed, for people to mobilize in their own interest. That's the bottom line.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I will email this stuff to you to Tony as I put it up, and I'll probably put up an edited audio version of our conversation at some point as well.
Okay, thank you, Owen. And is it Tony or is it Scott?
I think it might have been Scott, actually.
I think it's Scott. Scott's our media campaign manager. So
yeah.
Okay, right. Great.
Thank you so much.
I'll be in touch with him. Okay, thank you, Owen.
Yep, thank you. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.